This episode is presented by Silversea.
From Kurtco Media. Coming up on the show.
I think there are some places on Earth that really puts in front of the beauty of nature in a very, let's say, direct and some sort of humbling way, and so that they force you to reset a bit your perspective and also your perspective on your daily life, the daily problems.
That's Silversea Vice President Andrea Tonet. I'm Bruce Wallen, and this is Travel That Matters. Hey everybody, and welcome to Travel That Matters. This is the podcast where we explore the world's most exceptional travel experiences and meet some of the fascinating people who make them possible. My guest today is definitely one of those people. His name is Andrea Tonet, and he is the Vice President of Product Strategy at Silversea. What does that mean? That means he is creating all of these experiences, on board, wherever you go in the world. Andrea has a hand in what you are doing, all the different, shore excursions and everything like that. Part of that, a big part of that, is culinary. Silversea actually recently introduced, and this is something that Andrea is very involved with, a new program that is unlike anything else I've heard of, in the cruise industry. It is very much, based in local food with local chefs and local excursions. And everywhere you go around the world, you are eating, drinking, experiencing the local cuisine in a completely new way. It sounds amazing. I can't wait to try it out. Be sure to stick around for the wrap when I have a bonus guest, actually, a wine expert who is going to talk to us about the best wine regions to visit in Europe and beyond. If you like this episode, please leave us a review, follow us, like us, all that stuff. But for now, let's explore the high seas and local cuisine with Andrea Tonet. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us on Travel That Matters.
Hi, Bruce. Thank you for having me here.
I learned that you are from the Dolomites, one of my absolute favorite places on earth. And I got to say, it's funny. The first time I went to the Dolomites, it was actually on a Silversea voyage. It was at the end of the voyage, and I did a Silversea extension, and I went up and stayed up near Cortina, and it was amazing. And I absolutely felt it was such a unexpected experience as part of what I envisioned a cruise, right? But to end with this incredible mountain place. So first of all, tell us about your Dolomites. What do you love about going back there now? And give us a couple of cool insider tips.
Well, listen, I'm a little biased there. Of course, I was born and raised there, so for me, those are the most beautiful mountains in the world. I mean, they are so majestic, so unique in their, let's say, shapes and colors, and they are also so kind of dramatically close. I don't know if you noticed, to the city center, to the towns, the villages, so that makes for this incredible scenery in that region. I mean, I love going back. I mean, it's always a very kind of a re-energizing experience for me, because I think there are some places on Earth that really puts in front of the beauty of nature in a very, let's say, direct and some sort of humbling way, and so that they force you to reset a bit your perspective and also your perspective on your daily life, the daily problems. So it's also a way to kind of clear a bit my mind. So I always love going back there.
And the fact that you brought it up, it's only 2 hours from Venice, hour and a half from Milano. It's incredible that kind of cleansing mountain experience is so close to these incredible historic cities.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is so much to do up there. I mean, there are 9 different parks. Anything that you can want to do is available there. You can go hiking, skiing, walking, taking great pictures. I mean, it's a perfect place for everybody. And I love it even more during the summer than during the winter, to be honest.
What part of the Dolomites do you recommend staying in? As to, making your base, you're obviously going to explore the whole area, but where's a great base?
Yeah, based on what you told me, I think the area where you were is kind of the most beautiful one around Cortina, the Dolomiti Bellunese, because it's the place where I come from. There are some great spots there, like the Lake of Braies, it's called. Is this beautiful small mountain lake with these huge mountains all around the perimeter. So they're basically mirrored in the lake water, and it's kind of a spectacular view. You can rent a little boat, just go across the lake. It's something really extraordinary.
Growing up there, did you do a lot of travel, in other parts of Italy and beyond Italy? Like, how was there an experience that kind of inspired you to get into the business that you're in?
Well, it's actually a pretty interesting question because I'm kind of a late traveler, if you will. As a kid, my parents were working a lot. They were very busy, so we didn't get to travel a lot, particularly internationally. So we were traveling mostly in Italy around my region. It's only when I gained my independence growing up that I was able to travel by myself or with my friends that I started to explore the world. And I think one of the kind of ways of doing that struck me the most and changed me the most in the early stages was doing road trips with my friends. So I did some of them in the US, around Europe. And I think it's the format of the road trip that really makes a difference, because it forces you to do things, be in places, stay in places that are not necessarily kind of the Lonely Planet destination, simply because you need to go from A to B and B to C. And sometimes distances are so broad and wide that you need to do kind of some unpredictable stops, and you stay in a motel in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico or in Ohio, or you stand like for 10 hours on a bus between Portugal and Spain at sunset. And those are kind of fun enough, the things that then you remember the most when you think back to it. Those are kind of the core memories that remain with you, the people that you made, the strangers that you spoke with. So I think that kind of format is the one that instilled more curiosity in my way of traveling.
I love that you said, because that kind of brings out, that is a very local experience when you're meeting that stranger, when you're stopping in that, roadside motel or whatever it is. And I think that's something sometimes the luxury travel industry, hotels, cruise ships, whatever it is, has kind of missed on, in particular, like food, right? And I think that's changing, and I want to ask you, it's one of the things I'm dying to ask you about is salt. Okay, so to me, this is exactly what has been missing, or I love this idea. So can you explain what salt is?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going back to your point about the industry and the importance that's been given to food, I think the industry has always, I'm talking of the travel industry, not just the cruise industry, but it's always recognized the importance of food and delivering good dining experiences. But they've always done it in a very, let's say, conservative and safe way, just because they love to keep the guest in a very, let's say, safe and comfort zone with a steak and potatoes, with a lobster, with a caviar, the big classics that maybe they can be expensive, but they are very easy to deliver in a consistent manner. No?
And so good, and they're great.
Yeah.
But yes,
yeah,
exactly.
And we still do it, and we still do it on our ships as well.
Sure.
But I think this kind of model went a bit under pressure when the guest started to change, when experiences really become at the center of their expectation when it comes to travel. Also, when it comes to food, they want to do something that has a kind of a story embedded. And I think that's kind of the great intuition behind salt, to recognize the huge storytelling potential that there is behind food. Because if you think about it, each of us thinking back of where we come from, our city, there is a dish, an ingredient, a preparation that is kind of typical of that place. And we can easily connect other stories that are about kind of the history, the culture, sometimes even the geography of the place that are linked to that specific dish. And in itself, that tells you how much potential there is in telling the story. So I think I always say that we use food as a Trojan horse in creating salt, because in reality it's not the end. The food is the mean that we utilize to tell the story about the places where we go around the world.
Of course, I'm from LA, so all our dishes that are representative of LA are actually from other places that we've stolen or borrowed, I should say, and recreated.
But that's very interesting what you say, because, for instance, the kind of the Italian cuisine that then adapted to the US is very different from the original Italian cuisine. It has all the influences and the history, the culture, the migration. So with that thing itself, you can build a story about the place if you think
that's
about
true.
it.
And it can still be good, like you said. So I 100% agree. Tell us about what salt is.
Okay, so in the simplest possible way, salt is our deep dive culinary program that is meant to connect guests to the destination through the lens of food and drinks. It's an ecosystem. It's a living ecosystem. So it's not just a test kitchen or a regional restaurant. It's a set of activities, venues, touch points that take place on board the ships and ashore throughout the entire guest experience. So for instance, we have hands-on cooking classes that take place in our salt lab, so a custom-built space on some of our ships. And of course, you learn about the specific ingredients, specific preparation of that area where you're sailing. We have the Salt Kitchen restaurant, which is the only regional restaurant at sea where the menu is changing every day based on where you are in the world. We have bespoke cocktails in the salt bar. We are serving kind of cocktails that are inspired by the region where we are in the world, on top, of course, of the great classics. And then we have an entire array of what we call the salt experiences, which are excursions, bespoke shore excursions that we develop with local experts, local chefs, and they really take you deeper into the destination, again, through the perspective of food.
Give us an example. How does that play out in, say, okay, we're pulling up in blank destination. How does it look, on the ground in that destination, and then once you're back on the ship, like how does it all tie together?
Sure. Let's take a place like Marseille, for instance. It is very close by here. For us, Marseille is the gateway to Provence. So when we are in Marseille, the entire program is pivoting, is kind of shaping to tell the story about that place through the lens of food. So there are plenty of activities that happen on board and ashore. For instance, on board in the Soul Lab that I mentioned before, you might learn how to cook the bouillabaisse, which is a quintessential French specialty. In the Salt Kitchen, the regional restaurant, you would have your terrain menu that is changing every day, and there you might have your duck breast that is glazed with honey and lavender from Provence. You might have the lamb shoulder with Provençal herbs. You might accompany that with wines that are specific from the region, which doesn't mean French wines. It means regions really from the Côte de Provence, which are different from the ones of the Côte de Rhône, the Burgundy, or Bordeaux. And the sommelier will be able to tell you the difference between these wine regions. And next door, you might go to the salt bar where the bartender can offer you a pastis or a pastis-based cocktail and explain to you why pastis is so important in the south of France, how they use it, how is it a refreshing beverage during the summer playing pétanque. And this is kind of activities that will change every day based on where we are. When you are ashore, of course, you can sign up for an experience. Of course, the Provence, the south of France, offered up plenty of opportunity in that sense. For instance, last year I was in one of our salt experiences in this little town that is called Lourmarin, which is 1 hour away from Marseille. It's a little village in Provence. An experience that takes place in a farmhouse from the 17th century. And the host is this Paul Griffon, which is a very interesting character. But the interesting thing is that it's not just any other host. He's actually the owner of the farmhouse. His family owned the place since 400 years. And so nobody's kind of better than him in telling the story. And when you're there, you learn about kind of the local specialties. You prepare your own tapenade with anchovies and black olives. You taste different olive oils that are produced in the farmhouse. And you have this very, let's say, casual lunch with the family with local cheeses, charcuterie, wines. And so it's a very ordinary experience that becomes extraordinary for how normal and how organic it takes place when you're there.
It doesn't sound ordinary. That sounds fantastic. Not ordinary, but but I get you. I know exactly what you're saying, and I like that you brought up Marseille too as an example. To Nancy Silverton, when she was on the show recently, and she specifically brought up Marseille as the one destination that just like kind of blew her away from a culinary standpoint recently. And I think there's like a huge immigrant influence in the cuisine there, and then also you have all the provincial traditions, and so great destination. Has there been another salt-related experience in another destination that just sticks out to you as one of your personal favorites?
There's probably one that stayed closer to my heart because it's one of the very first ones that we developed when we started with salt back in the summer of 2021. It was actually when we were starting service after the pandemic, so it was a very important kind of moment for the entire company. And we were debuting Silver Moon, which is the first ship where salt was debuting. So the first inaugural season was all around Greece and the Greek cuisine, and we had some amazing experiences, including this one in Crete. We were on the hills above Crete in this organic farm. you can picture the scene. There was this pergola with a beautiful view of the sea at sunset, and underneath there was this huge stone fireplace where they were cooking on these kind of a clay vessels. They were cooking the vegetables from the garden, and it was just outside you had the garden. We were going around with the owner. They were explaining us the different species and the nearly forgotten species of eggplant, of zucchini, of melons, and then we were harvesting some of them, bringing it back to the table, slicing them together, and kind of a cooking for dinner. So that was kind of something that remained with me. But I think the thing that stayed the most was the actual owner of the farm. But it was getting emotional when he was talking about the farm. It was getting emotional when he was talking about the school that he just opened to kind of preserve the tradition of the Cretan cuisine and the culinary philosophy, and how much that was important, because for him was going back to the heritage of his family, to the link to the territory, the link to the island. And you realize that that's really what Salt is about. When the story is always bigger than whomever is telling it, whatever is the location, it's always really about the story and about how that links to the sense of the place.
That's funny. You just answered the next question I was going to ask you, which is like, how are, I assume that these local winemakers, the farmers, the chefs, they kind of appreciate that ability to connect on a deeper level with guests, rather than just kind of providing a product that, gets consumed 3 days later in a different country. What has the reaction been from the providers that you're working with?
It's been amazing, honestly, and I think that's what constitutes also in a more business perspective our greatest competitive advantage. The fact that this is not just a commercial partnership, it's not just transactional, but it's really about kind of sharing a point of view, sharing a vision on what a story can be around food. And I think these kind of local operators, but also bigger names, see this as a platform, as a way for them to tell their story, because they understand that we want to go a bit deeper, that we want to really have the people bring to the surface what was the idea behind, what is the link to the territory, something that is more and more at the center of the kind of a high-end cuisine. So many kind of third parties really seeing this as a way for them, as a platform for them to tell their story. So that's something that is growing almost organically for us.
How do you replicate that in areas where, cuisine is not, Antarctica, there's no real cuisine culture, right? Like, how do you kind of provide experiences that immerse guests in that same way where you on an expedition cruise, let's say?
Before going into expedition, but since you mentioned kind of areas where the culinary tradition may not be the kind of the first thing that you expect from your travel, there's this little example. When you mentioned Antarctica, it came to my mind, referred to Salt. This little example from Iceland, which is definitely not kind of a food destination when you think about it. Right. When we managed to create an entire Salt story in that place as well for all the voyages. And we did it through this young emerging chef that is called Gisli Matt. And he's kind of it owns one of the hottest table right now in Iceland. And he's the guy that somehow reinvented Icelandic cuisine, taking inspiration from the new Nordic cuisine. And with this guy, basically, we develop an entire set of activities that take place on land, but also on board. We redesign the menu on board. We design the classes on board. And when we are ashore, we go to his place. Of course, we have lunch, but we do foraging of the herbs from the volcanic land with the volcanic rocks. We do the geothermal ovens when they bake the bread underground. So in this incredible location, the smoking room, which is, of course, core to the Nordic cuisine. So all these things that are very unexpected, and the reception, of course, is great by our guests, because it's easy to kind of expect something around food when you are in France, when you are in Italy, but when you go to Iceland, having an experience like this, it's really something different. Well, but there are places like Galapagos, for instance, where even there guests get surprised by the culinary experience that they get. That is kind of a local salt experience by definition, because you can only source the kind of the local products, local fishes, what the farmers are producing on the islands. And the ratings that we get from our guests on the food experience on that ship in the Galapagos are extraordinary, just because it's so authentic, so good, so fresh, that is really mind-blowing for them. But going to Antarctica, since you mentioned it before, or even the Arctic, this kind of very remote destination, of course there we cannot kind of force the element of food, because it wouldn't make sense in a place where actually food is not available. But I think the ethos, the philosophy of salt is very much replicated into the way we interpret the destination as a remote destination. So in place of telling the story through food, in that case, we tell it through the best expert of those places, by having the kind of the best expedition team in the world, by having geologists, marine biologists, historians, ornithologists, people that really can interpret the place where you are, some of the most hostile places around the world, and can make it that understandable for you, telling you the story, go underneath what you wouldn't normally understand. And if you think about that, the connection with salt is very strong. It's just a very different model of doing the same thing, which is telling the real story of the place where you are.
Let's talk briefly about the design. We've talked a lot about kind of how the experiences immerse guests wherever you are, but there's also, I know, the new ships. You have a new one that recently launched and an upcoming one, I believe. The design sounds very different to me of a typical what you would expect of a cruise ship. Tell me about how that plays into this whole concept of immersing guests in each destination.
Well, of course, the ship is very important for us. In the end, we are in the cruise industry. Everything is based on what we do and we can do with a ship. We see them very much as the enabler for us. Now, they are first of all the thing that take you there, but we want them to be something more than that. But I think this gets to its fullest potential when you can embed this idea of connected to the destination into the very original design of the ship, in the way you conceive, in the way that you ideate the ship design. And I think that's what we managed to do with our latest class of ships. So the Silver Nova class, so the Silver Nova that arrived last year, and Silver Ray that has just arrived. We actually just christened the Silver Ray. But in that case, we could embed since the beginning this idea of, okay, how do we create a stronger connection with the destination? And in the case of Silver Nova, it was really in the engineering of the ship, by building what we define as an asymmetrical ship, which basically means that the left side is different from the right side. So the port side is different from the starboard side in technical terms, which is something very uncommon in cruises. Normally, ships are very kind of symmetrical, very much the same on the two sides, because it's easier to build, easier to design, easier to do everything. But we did it because that allowed us to create an unprecedented openness to the destination. So when you go on board these ships, particularly on the open decks, you have, for instance, the pool deck, which is entirely open on one side, something that you don't see on any other ship. So when you are there by the pool deck, you have this incredible views of the sea, of the destination. You don't have any kind of steel work in front of you, and you always have that feeling of the destination being there, being alive, also when you are on board. The same thing in the indoor spaces, where through kind of a plenty of glass, we have over 4,000 square meters of glass glazing around the ship. We brought inside an incredible kind of amount of natural light and great views of the outside. So even when you are inside the ship, you always have this feeling of being sort of live in the destination, and it makes for a completely different feeling of the inside experience as well.
We talked a little bit about the surprise element of travel, which that's so important to me. And I think in general, the cruise industry has the potential to surprise people, because I do think a lot of people have preconceived notions of what a cruise is. I know for me, again, going back to my Dolomites example, like that's not what I expected of a cruise. And so, and that wasn't the only thing, but like that was a surprise. And that kind of like opened my mind to, okay, this is a different way of doing things. How do you see that with people? Like, are people surprised? Like, have you seen people's preconceived notions of cruising change after something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think cruising can surprise you in many different ways, also depending on what is your experience of the cruise world. And I can kind of testify that myself. Talking of cruising more in general, there is this element of convenience that is always extremely underestimated. how easy it is to and how relaxing it is to travel by cruise. I mean, the value that you get out of the time that you spend on the cruise is something that is unparalleled with any other mean of traveling. I mean, the stress, the anxiety, the time of commuting from one place to the other, all these things are completely taken out of the picture, and you really maximize the time that you spend in a certain place. And I mean, that's for the industry in general. I think that when it comes to an operator like Silversea, what people are very surprised about is kind of the level of personalization that you can achieve on a cruise ship. That's something that particularly people that come from a bigger vessel are not used to. You can have beautiful ships, you can have great food, great excursions, whatever, but it always comes down to the people. And I think the quality of the people that we have on board with our crew is extraordinary. The level of training that we provide them is really extraordinary. And that results in a level of personalization and care that is not seen anywhere else. The fact of remembering the preferences, remembering the names, anticipating the needs, those are the things that always get remarked and underlined as the reasons why people come back.
Yeah, and you really, I mean, over the course of a few days, you really do get to know a lot of the staff members, which is a great part of the experience. Well, Andrea, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I can't wait to try out salt myself one of these days soon. So thank you for joining us.
We look forward to welcoming you on board, Bruce.
And now for the Wallen Wrap-Up.
If you thought Andrea had a fun job or has a fun job, my next guest, my bonus guest, is right there with him. He's a wine expert. He, judges wine events. He's a wine guide, but he's also the head wine consultant for Silversea Cruises. So he's picking all the wines that you see on board, which, as you can probably guess, is a very locally driven process. He's been everywhere in the wine world, and he's going to talk to us about some of his favorite destinations for wine lovers right now. Lawrence, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So I am very excited to talk to you because, well, for many reasons, but one, I just got back from Priorat, from a few days in Spanish wine country in Priorat, and I got to say, it blew me away. So I'm very excited to talk to you about wine regions. And actually, I heard you just got back from a road trip through Germany, which is another kind of wine region that I think a lot of people are discovering as a kind of a travel experience.
Well, I think, I went to Germany with my partner. We went to Dresden and Leipzig and Weimar, and unbelievably interesting, culturally stimulating places, fantastic. And we ended up, of course, I could not go to Germany without going to one of its great wine regions. Germany has a very special relationship to wine insofar as they are the kings and queens and jacks of Riesling. And Riesling is a grape that is unique. And I can see why for some people, it is the finest wine anyway. And it's absolutely fantastic. And I went to the region called the Rheingau, which is near Frankfurt and Wiesbaden. And it's absolutely beautiful. And I'm just going to keep going back to German wine country. Absolutely.
So with all these, Germany, Spain, I'm sure France, Italy, you live in Chianti, in the hills of Chianti. Where, one or two places, let's focus on Europe for now, that really stand out to you as a great travel experience. So not just, of course, the wines are, we want the wines to be great, but like a place where you can really go and get that kind of immersion and feel like you're getting an authentic wine cultural tasting experience.
I would say one place that I have been to a few times, and it's stunning just even to think about it, is the Douro Valley in Portugal. So the Douro, of course, being the river that starts off as the Duero in Spain, and that flows through Portugal as the Douro at that point. It is one of the most spectacular, it has to be one of the most spectacular wine regions. It is one of the most spectacular wine regions. Absolutely spectacular, number one, just aesthetically to the eye. Number two, of course, it's where port was made. And that's another, like Riesling, that's another wine, that's a whole other universe, which one can just spend one's life on, frankly, port. I know that there are fewer port lovers or fewer people drink port, but they still make it as well, if not better, like all wines. So I would say the Douro Valley. And so I would mention there in terms of France, also Alsace, which is absolutely beautiful. Of course, the Alsatians might not say that they're totally French. They've always been between Germany and France. And another place that's beautiful, and I want to plug them, is Beaujolais. Because believe it or not, Beaujolais took a hit in terms of its reputation because of Beaujolais Nouveau and all that whole thing, but it is absolutely beautiful country, making beautiful wines, and it's full of history, just absolutely full of history.
You mentioned the Silversea experience, kind of like, how does that play out? If you're on a cruise through the Med or wherever you are, like, how do some of these experiences kind of play out for guests? How are you kind of diving into these places, given what you got a day, maybe you don't have a week, so what do those experiences look like?
Well, there's a whole team, of course, that takes care of excursions and that organizes excursions, and many of the excursions in wine country are going to, of course, be wine related, and so they're going to be visits to wineries and to the wine country in general. One of my favorites, and Bruce, I don't know if you've been there, but you really have to, is Stellenbosch, is the Cape, South Africa.
Yes.
Absolutely. Have you been there?
I have been there. I was in South Africa recently, and we didn't make it out to Stellenbosch because we were just there for a couple of days, and so we stayed local, where we had some great wines as well. We went to the Cape winelands, right around Cape Town there. But
sure.
I mean, yes, Stellenbosch, one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen, and incredible, hotels and restaurants, and it's like Napa times 10, but not as commercialized, it seems like.
Not as commercialized, even though the visitor experience is fantastic. And last time, just for the just an anecdote, last time I was in Cape Town, it was about maybe a year ago. I flew in just to embark, but I had the day. And so I went and had a very good meal, smack in Cape Town or by the sea. And it was so fantastic. It was such a good meal. And I love food as much as I love wine. I mean, as I say, they go together. And the Maître d' there, it's a famous restaurant. And the Maître d' there is saying, we want to make South Africa a gastronomic destination as well as everything else, which, 40 years ago, there was no culinary experience really to be had in South Africa. And it has bloomed and it's fused with the whole world. It's fantastic.
We actually had Liam Tomlin on the show, a great South African chef, recently, and I was down there and ate at one of his restaurants in November as well. And he is actually, he talked about that, how there's been this kind of movement. There are a lot of people have come in, they're training the local chefs, and then, of course, the local chefs open up their own restaurants, and it just kind of proliferates around that. But yeah, you really do see that coming together there, as you have, again, like if you're talking about Chianti, we have thousands of years of history in that type of tradition, but there it's relatively new, but it's also very exciting.
3,000 years of history here in Chianti. The wines have never been made as well. South Africa, fewer. I mean, the wine grapes were brought to South Africa in the 17th century. Wines have never been better. And this is one of the great, very exciting, of course, facts about the wine world. I wish I had a second life to keep on going. But the world of wine, the horizon, the world of wine is one of the few, in my mind, in the world today that simply keeps progressing in the best sense. Their wines are more varied, they're more authentic and sustainable, but they also taste better at every price range. It's absolutely sensational.
How does that play? That makes your job tougher. If you're selecting all these wines, or maybe it makes it easier, but if you're selecting all the wines on board for Silversea, how are you tying that into the local experiences? But B, how are you when there's so many great wines out there from Georgia, from Cape Town, from wherever? How are you going about that?
How is that reflected on wine lists? Of course, the great majority of people, just normal consumers, wine consumers, are not experts. And that, to your point, today you really have to be an expert in order to understand the world of wine. You can't just kind of wing it with a knowledge of Bordeaux and Burgundy and Champagne. So the thing is, it's a mix, and we have several wine programs on Silversea, and I have to say, rather unique. That manage to bring those two worlds together. That means the world of well-known wines, which are the wines that an average consumer, whether in Silversea or in a restaurant anywhere in Europe, in the United States, or in Asia, is going to select a wine that he or she recognizes in one way or another, either the brand or the appellation, where it comes from, etc. Probably 85% of the wines of the world are probably not known by people, by the average consumer. So we try to bring that on in several ways. One is the SALT program. And it really is, it's logistically, Silversea ships are moving all over they're like sharks. They move all over the planet all the time. They don't have a base There's no home port or anything. So wines have to be sent by containers, etc. And the SALT program is really, is you have the culinary and wine experience of the port you're in that evening, or the closest thing to it if you're at sea. And they change every night, every day. Well, certainly in the Mediterranean, in wine-producing countries, they do. So that is one way of introducing. It's kind of a necessary discovery for people, and that's why the SALT program has been so successful, because of the food, of course, but also because of the wine. They're discovering. That's how you have people discover new things all the time.
That discovery is what the show is all about. So I think that's an excellent point. So, well, Lawrence, thank you so much. I want to go wine tasting with you someday in Europe. So I'm going to have to figure out how to make that happen.
Thanks a lot, Bruce.
Travel That Matters is produced and edited for Kurtco Media by AJ Mosley. Marketing by Katrin Skapertis. For more information on the destinations we talked about today, please check out our show notes or visit kurtco.com/travel that matters. We would love to hear from you, so please leave us a comment on YouTube, or if you're listening on the podcast, please write to us at bruce@kurtco.com. That's Bruce at curtco.com.